cruel uncle dragged the girl into the shadows of the forest, and it was her cries that tore through the silence and reached the ears of the one woman who refused to turn away. In the quiet village of Canola, no one doubted the wickedness of Bakar. His temper was feared, his fists were heavy, and his heart was harder than stone. Yet, though people whispered in their homes, none dared to stand against him. And so, when he clutched the thin wrist of his orphaned niece Nala and pulled her down the dirt path leading into the dark trees, the villagers only watched. Eyes lowered, lips sealed, they let cruelty walk past them. But one pair of ears could not ignore the sound of a child's desperation. Amina, the seamstress with gentle hands and a heart worn but unbroken, had been bent over her work when the sharp cry pierced the air. The threads in her lap fell forgotten. She didn't stop to wonder if it was safe, nor did she pause to weigh her chances against the strongest man in the region. Her body moved before her mind could stop her. She pushed her stool back and followed the echoes of sorrow into the forest. The air grew cooler as the sun dipped behind branches, yet her resolve only grew warmer. She didn't know what she would find, whether it was too late or if her own strength would fail her. But destiny left her no choice. Soon, her eyes caught a sign that cut straight through her chest, a strip of blue fabric tangled in the thorny claws of a bush. She reached for it with trembling hands, her breath catching. The cloth was not just any cloth. It was from Nala's skirt, the very one she herself had sewn. She remembered the girl standing timidly in her small shop, her lashes wet with tears, shoulders hunched as though trying to make herself invisible. She remembered smoothing the hem, whispering, "Stand tall, little one. Even in sorrow, rise like a queen." Now that same skirt was torn, its piece caught here as if the earth itself testified to the cruelty unfolding deeper within. The scrap burned against Amina's palm. It was proof that this was no misunderstanding, no harmless scolding. Nala was in real danger, and this time, unlike so many silences of her own past, Amina could not walk away. She pressed the cloth against her chest, her lips moving in prayer. "God of my mother and grandmother, grant me courage. Don't let me turn back now." At that moment she was no longer only a seamstress. She was a protector, a witness, a woman being carried forward by something larger than her own fear. Her feet quickened, but her mind was dragged backward into memory. She had known the sound of muffled crying long before this day. As a child, she had hidden in corners when her father's hand struck her mother. She had seen injustice fill her house like smoke, choking out laughter. Maybe that was why she couldn't turn away now. Maybe that was why she followed the cries, refusing to let the story repeat itself. The path narrowed until it was little more than a tunnel of leaves. Shadows pressed in, and the stillness grew heavy. Amina clutched the scrap of skirt like a charm, knowing it wasn't just torn cloth. It was a thread binding her life to the girl's. A thread that must be repaired. Then, a sound split the silence. A branch snapping beneath a heavy boot. Amina froze. Bakar's voice followed, rough and laced with venom. He barked insults at Nala, calling her a burden, promising that shame would die with her there in the woods. Fear swept over Amina, cold and sharp. Yet something stronger welled up inside her, pushing her forward. She crept behind a wide trunk, holding her breath as his figure came into view. Nala, small and trembling, was pressed against a tree, her thin arms raised to shield her face. Bakar's hand gripped a vine, ready to strike like a whip. The girl's sobs broke into muffled screams, the kind of cries that came from someone who had learned, again and again, that no one would ever step in to defend her. But this time, someone would. Amina's throat burned. The fabric clenched in her hand felt alive, blazing with purpose. She shook with fear, yet her spirit stood firm. Without thinking, she stepped from the shadows, her voice rising steady and fierce. "Let her go, man!" The forest seemed to stop breathing. Even the birds fell silent. Slowly, Bakar turned, his dark eyes narrowing, startled that a woman's voice dared interrupt him. Recognition flickered. He knew her. "The seamstress," he spat, his mouth twisting into a cruel smile. His laugh came sharp and bitter. "No one will believe you, Amina. Who are you against me? I'm her blood. You're nothing but a meddler who doesn't know her place." The weight of his words was heavy enough to crush any timid soul. But Amina's feet remained rooted. Her fear pounded in her chest, yet her voice carried like a drumbeat in war. Blood that harms is not blood that raises. No man has the right to raise a hand against a child. Her words struck deeper than the whip he carried. Nala looked up through tear-blurred eyes, and for the first time, saw hope flicker in the darkness. Someone had stood against her uncle. Someone had spoken for her. Bakar's rage grew. He stepped forward, his body broad, his teeth clenched, the vine trembling in his hand. But something in Amina's gaze halted him. It was the look of a woman who would not retreat, who would rather fall than allow injustice to pass unanswered. "You don't understand anything, woman," Bakar hissed, spitting on the ground. "That girl is nothing but trouble. She belongs to me, and I'll do with her whatever I please." Amina steadied her breath, feeling the damp forest air sting her lungs. Her mother's words rang within her. "When evil rises, it is not beaten by violence, but by truth unafraid." She raised her chin. "I heard her crying. I found her skirt torn on the thorns. The forest itself bears witness against you. Even if no one listens, even if the village turns on me, I will not let your cruelty erase this life." Bakar laughed louder, his insults flying, calling her a fool, a childless, husbandless woman who should know her place. But his words faltered in the air, drained of power by the fire in Amina's eyes. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves, as if the very trees leaned to stand with her. His arm no longer raised with certainty. He knew, if he struck, he would not just be striking a child, he would be striking against truth itself. In that hesitation, Nala broke free. She stumbled forward and clung to Amina's skirt, burying her face against the woman's side. Amina's arm wrapped around her, strong and protective, as though holding her own younger self. No words were needed. That embrace was enough to shatter Bakar's illusion of power. For the first time, his cruelty met resistance, and faltered. Amina, the seamstress with calloused hands and quiet strength, showed that courage was not born of fists or titles, but of a heart unwilling to surrender to fear. Bakar did not win that day, and though the fight was not finished, that moment marked the beginning of his fall. The forest seemed heavier as Amina and Nala emerged hand in hand. Their steps were quick, their breaths uneven, yet neither spoke. The child's cheeks were streaked with tears, her eyes darting behind her, fearing her uncle's shadow. But Amina's chin stayed high, her heartbeat still thunderous, her spirit unbroken. In her pocket, the blue fabric remained, silent proof of truth and of courage. As they neared the edge of the forest, the first mud houses of Canola appeared. Women weaving baskets set their work aside to stare. Men leaning on staffs followed with cold eyes. Children stopped their games and ran to see. A hush followed them as they stepped out of the woods, as if the entire village had been waiting for this moment. The seamstress, holding the girl tightly by her side, was no longer just another woman returning from her day's work. She carried with her a trembling child, the truth hidden in her pocket, and the courage of someone who had looked cruelty in the face and refused to bow. The first to notice was an old woman weaving mats near her courtyard. Her wrinkled hands paused mid-braid, her sharp eyes narrowing as they landed on the torn hem of Nala's skirt. Behind her, two younger women stopped pounding grain, their pestles frozen in the air. A whisper began to ripple from house to house. Children stopped running and followed with wide eyes, pointing at Nala's tear-streaked face and Amina's firm grip. The men were slower to react. They leaned against their staffs, silent but watchful. They knew Bakar's temper. They had seen his rages before, and none had dared interfere. Now, seeing his niece return clinging to another woman, their gazes sharpened with suspicion. Some frowned, others muttered under their breath, already wondering what tale Amina would tell, and whether they had the courage to listen. Nala stumbled on a stone, but Amina's arm tightened around her waist, steadying her. The girl's breath came in short, fearful gasps. Every few steps, her head jerked back toward the shadows of the trees, expecting her uncle to burst out, vine in hand, his fury chasing them all the way to the village square. But the forest stayed still, holding its secrets. Amina's own breath burned in her lungs, but she kept her chin lifted. Her heart still pounded from the confrontation, yet she would not let the village see her fear. The scrap of blue fabric pressed against her palm inside her pocket. Damp with sweat but unyielding, a witness to all that had happened beneath the trees. To her, it was more than cloth. It was truth. It was proof. It was the thread binding her fate to this child's. They walked past the first row of mud houses. Doors opened. Faces leaned out. Murmurs thickened into buzzing whispers. "Is that Nala? Where is Bakar? Why is the seamstress with her?" Children trailed closer, their bare feet kicking up dust, until Amina turned a sharp eye on them and they stopped, sensing the gravity in her steps. In the center of the village, where the open ground lay wide and dusty, more eyes gathered. Men with folded arms, women balancing pots on their heads, young boys holding goats by ropes. Amina felt the weight of them all pressing in, waiting for her to stumble, for her to lower her gaze, for her to lose the courage that had carried her out of the forest. But she didn't falter. She kept walking, holding Nala's hand like a lifeline, her spine straight, her steps heavy with meaning. The girl's tears glistened as she clung tighter. her small frame shaking with sobs that no one could ignore. For the first time, the villagers had to see what they had pretended not to hear for so long. The pain of a child, the cruelty of a man they feared too much to oppose. Amina carried that truth with her, visible in every tear, every trembling step, every shred of cloth. And so, when they reached the edge of the square, silence fell over Canola. The women weaving, the men leaning, the children whispering, all of them stopped and stared. Their silence was no longer just avoidance. It was the silence of witnesses, the silence of a village confronted with the truth it had hidden from itself. Children ran, whispering among themselves. It was impossible not to notice Amina leading Nala by the hand, her eyes steady and breath still uneven. But it was Bakar who broke the silence. He appeared shortly after, heavy-footed, his eyes burning with restrained fury. Before anyone could ask what had happened, he raised his voice in accusation. "This girl disgraces me. She's rebellious, disobedient, and ungrateful. And now, to make things worse, she dragged this meddling seamstress into family matters." His words echoed through the central courtyard. Many nodded without question. After all, in villages like that, a man's word often carried more weight than anyone else's, especially against a lone woman. "A man doesn't lie about honor," muttered an elder, scratching his chin. Others repeated it as if it were gospel. Amina stood insolence, holding tightly to Nala's hand. She knew that any hasty reply would be used against her. Bakar, sensing his advantage, puffed out his chest. "This woman tries to act like a saint, but she's just a seamstress who doesn't know her place. She defends a spoiled child because she's never known what it's like to raise one with hardship." The murmurs grew. Some older women exchanged glances, torn between doubt and fear. Amina felt the weight of their eyes as if they were all measuring her courage. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she knelt, adjusted Nala's skirt, wiped the girl's tears with the corner of her cloth, and hugged her. The gesture spoke louder than words. Still, the mark was left. The next day, whispers echoed through backyards. "Did you see how Amina got involved, defending an ungrateful child against her own uncle?" Others added, "Careful, she might bring misfortune to the village." The nickname meddler spread like wildfire in dry grass. Dotella felt it all in her skin. Her playmates' eyes held suspicion. The neighbors' words dripped with hidden poison. But it was Amina who carried most of the weight. At the market she heard the whispers. At the well she felt the sidelong glances. Her reputation, once quiet and respected, as the honest seamstress who made a living on her own, was now stained by the boldness of standing up to a man. Even so, she had no regrets. On silent nights, when she sat by the oil lamp mending clothes, her heart was heavy, but her conscience was clear. If I had stayed quiet, she thought that vine would have left its mark on the girl's skin forever. Nala stayed at her house some nights when her uncle left her on the street until late. Other times, she returned home with her eyes downcast, feet dragging, carrying the weight of Becca's words on her back. Rebellious, ungrateful, useless burden. The girl never answered, but each word left a wound. Amina saw it all and kept silent like someone mending torn fabric without anyone noticing. The blue scrap remained hidden, tucked among her few belongings, a sign that truth existed, even if everyone chose to look away. The village's silence, dense and heavy, wasn't just a refusal to believe her. It was the reflection of a society where a child's voice meant nothing, and a woman's courage came at a high price. And it was in that silence that Amina understood her fight was far from over. It wasn't enough to save Nala from the forest. Now she had to save her from the invisible claws of the community's judgment. And with every suspicious glance, every poisoned whisper, the flame of Amina's determination grew stronger. Because there was one thing the heavy silence of the village could never erase: the certainty that by standing beside that girl, she was stitching a different future. Stitch by stitch, thread by thread. Time passed, but the weight of the village on Amina did not fade. The neighbors still whispered. The men still repeated that blood honor is not up for debate. And Bakar, increasingly enraged, made sure to reinforce Nala's image as a rebellious, ungrateful, and dishonest niece. But truth rarely rests on words alone. It insists on revealing itself in the details that slipped through control. And it was in one of those details that Amina discovered what she'd already feared: the hidden marks on the girl's body. One stifling afternoon, Nala showed up at Amina's workshop. In her hands, she held a bundle of fabric that needed altering for a village celebration, a rare occasion when Bakahad allowed her out. Perhaps to maintain an appearance of normalcy before the community. Nala entered quietly as always, and Amina quickly noticed how the girl's shoulders were hunched, as if she were trying to disappear inside herself. "Come here, girl," said the seamstress gently. "Turn to the side. Let me see how this skirt fits you." Nala obeyed, but her movements were slow, as if each gesture took great effort. When Amina crouched to adjust the fabric around her waist, she noticed something strange. There was a heavy silence in the air, and the girl's breathing seemed trapped. Then, as she lifted the blouse slightly to check the seam, the seamstress saw the welts. They were deep, red, still fresh. Some scars had begun to heal, but others were new, as if the pain had been carved into Nala's body just the night before. Amina felt her stomach turn. She dropped to her knees before the girl, not in submission but in compassion. She didn't ask anything right away. She retrieved a small jar of herbal oil from a shelf, kept there to soothe body aches, and with careful hands began to apply the balm to the girl's back. The scent of the plant filled the air and the girl flinched. Amina noticed she was biting her lips, trying to hold back tears. "She easy, my child," murmured the seamstress, hardly noticing she had called her that. It was then that Nightlaw in a whisper let out the truth that had been suffocating her. "If I talk, he'll kill me." The words were like a blade. Amina almost dropped the jar. She had already known, already suspected, but hearing it from the girl's own lips confirmed the horror that everyone else insisted on denying. She wrapped her arms around Nala's fragile shoulders, careful not to press the wounds. She didn't respond with big speeches or empty promises. She just held the child close to her chest, letting the warmth of her embrace be the only reply. Outside, the village carried on as usual. The pounding of mortar, the songs of women washing clothes in the river, the laughter of children playing in the dusty road. No one saw, no one knew, or perhaps no one wanted to know. But inside that small workshop, the entire world seemed to stop. Amina thought once again of her own childhood. She remembered hearing her mother chryssalently, hiding bruises under cloth, and growing up believing that carrying pain alone was normal. Now with Nala before her, she saw the chance to break that cycle. After she finished applying the oil, Amina looked into the girl's eyes. She didn't promise things would be easy. She didn't say the pain would end tomorrow. She only said with the firmness of someone who knows life's harshness, "As long as I breathe, you won't be alone." Nala looked down as if afraid to believe. But for the first time, she rested her head on the seamstress's shoulder, accepting that silent refuge. The afternoon faded slowly, and the workshop filled with the golden light of dusk. Amina returned to her work, sewing the skirt's fabric, while Nala remained seated, watching the woman's hands move. It was as if every stitch in the thread was also mending something invisible in her wounded soul. The scars were still there, hidden on the girl's body. But in that workshop, the first signs were born of something the car could never erase. The silent bond between a woman who had carried her own pain and a child who for the first time dared to believe that someone was willing to fight for her. The village market was the heart of community life. Everything could be found there. Fruits picked at dawn, vegetables carried in woven baskets, colorful fabrics laid out in the sun, and even small animals for sale or trade. More than a place of commerce, it was a place of conversation, advice, laughter, and gossip, which traveled faster than the wind. It was there that reputations were made and unmade. On a sweltering morning, when the scent of ripe mangoes mixed with the dust kicked up by hurried feet, Nala was dragged into the center of the market by Bakar. His face was hard, his grip tight on the girl's arm. His eyes already warned that something was about to happen. With every step, curious stares turned toward them. Vendors paused their calls to customers. Men stopped haggling over corn prices, and even the children fell silent at the scene unfolding. When they reached a fruit stall, Bakar shoved Nala forward and shouted, "This girl stole!" Grabbed a handful of fruit without asking me. A wave of murmurs swept through the crowd. Some nodded immediately without waiting for any explanation. The old saying echoed on more than one mouth. A motherless child learns to steal early. The words pierced Nala's chest like spears. Her eyes filled with tears, and she lowered her head, unable to defend herself. Bakar, seeing the crowd's reaction, raised his voice even louder. "You all see. I tried to raise her right, and all she brings me is shame." His face was red, and saliva sprayed with every word, drenched in fury. The murmurs grew louder, and little Nala seemed to sink into the dust beneath her feet, as if she wished she could vanish beneath the stones. That was when Amina appeared, cutting through the crowd. In one hand, she carried a basket of folded fabrics, which she had planned to trade for corn. But when she saw the scene, she dropped a basket without hesitation. She approached with firm steps, her eyes burning with indignation. "Enough." Her voice rang out, cutting through the chatter. "She's not the thief. The real thief is the adult who uses a child to cover his own misery." Silence fell for a moment. People exchanged looks, unsure whether to support or condemn her. Amina's courage shocked them, but also made them uncomfortable. A woman alone, unmarried, challenging a man in the middle of the square. That was dangerous. Bakar laughed loudly, trying to turn her accusation into a joke. "Did you hear that? The seamstress thinks she's a judge now, wants to teach the whole village right from wrong. But Amina didn't back down. She opened the cloth bag slung over her shoulder and pulled out a few wrapped coins. She walked up to the fruit stall and laid the money on the vendor's table, who had been watching the scene in silence. "Here's the payment," she said, looking each person in the eye. "Because there's no shame in a child taking a fruit to feed her hunger. The shame lies in those who create hunger and resentment inside their homes." The words struck deep, and even those who didn't like Amina felt the weight of the truth. Some turned their eyes away, others whispered more softly. Bucker, however, puffed out his chest, still trying to maintain control. "You think your pretty speeches will fool everyone?" he growled. "The village knows who I am. They know this girl is rebellious." But what the village saw right in front of them was something else. They saw a quiet, defenseless child, and a simple woman with calloused hands who had nothing to gain except the peace of her own conscience by standing up to him. That image carried more weight than any words. Nala, still silent, looked up at Amina at that moment. There was shame, yes, but also a spark of gratitude. For the first time, someone was defending her in public in front of everyone, and that had a value no coin or reputation could buy. The market continued, but the mood had shifted. The scene spread like fire. Some praised Amina's courage in secret, others criticized her boldness, but no one left without the image seared into their mind. The confrontation between the seamstress and the cruel uncle before the entire crowd. And so once again, Amina paid dearly for her courage. Her reputation as a meddler grew, the woman who didn't know her place. But she also planted a seed in the village's heart, a crack of doubt in the version of truth Barker so desperately tried to uphold. That day the market became a stage for shame, but the shame, though Baka tried to throw it on Nala, had begun to turn back on him. Night had fallen heavy over the village. The wind carried with it the scent of the approaching rain, and the clouds, dark as coal, swallowed the moon in the backyard of his house. Becca, consumed by a rage that seemed endless, slammed the wooden door shut and locked it tight, leaving Nala outside. The girl hunched over, pounded her small hands against the door, begging for shelter. "Uncle, please let me in." Her voice was thin, nearly swallowed by the howl of the wind. But Baka's reply was nothing but cruel silence, followed by the grinding of the reinforced latch. He extinguished the oil lamp and laid down on his mat, determined to punish the girl, not with a whip this time, but with the cold of the night and the storm that was soon to come. The first drop fell heavy, then another, and within minutes the storm unleashed itself upon the village. The earth turned to mud and Nala's clothes clung to her body. She trembled, trying to curl up against the doorframe, but the water ran off the roof and poured over her without mercy. Across the street, Amina, the seamstress, was still awake. She sewed by the dim glow of a lamp, as she often did on nights when orders had to be finished. The sound of the rain muffled everything, but a faint whimper broke through, just enough to catch her attention. She set the needle down, squinted into the dark, and listened closely. The sound was coming from Backer's house. Amina rose, wrapped a thick cloth around her shoulders, and stepped out into the rain. Crossing the street, she saw the figure of the girl soaked through and shaking like a nestle's bird. Her heart clenched in a way no words could explain. She approached and laid a hand on the child's shoulder. "Nala, come with me." The girl looked up wide-eyed, unable to believe someone truly cared. Amina gently pulled her in, crossed the street again, and opened her door. The warm light of the lamp lit up the girl's pale face, and the scent of dry cloth and herbal tea filled the air, bringing instant relief. "Take off those wet clothes," Amina said, her voice calm. "I'll get you something dry to wear." She fetched a cotton skirt and a simple blouse. She had stored away and handed them to the girl. Then she brought out a warm but clean towel and helped her dry off her small, shivering body, while Nala dressed the Mina, warmed a bit of milk with honey, and offered it in a clay bowl. The girl drank slowly, feeling the warmth spread through her chest, though silent tears still rolled down her face. Amina then brought her close to the loom. She sat down, picked up a colorful blanket she had finished days earlier, and wrapped it gently around Nala. Then she began to sing softly, an old lullaby she had learned from her mother on stormy nights. Rain washes the earth, wind carries the fear in life's embrace. The child finds peace. Nala closed her eyes. For the first time in a long time, she fell asleep without fear of being woken by shouts or blows. The sound of the rain outside mixed with Amina's gentle voice, and the girl's heart, so used to the cold sting of rejection, found refuge in the warmth of that improvised home. Amina watched her for a long time. She brushed the girl's damp hair softly, and let out a deep sigh. She didn't know how she'd face Pakar the next day, nor how she'd endured the village's judgment if they found out Nala had slept in her house. But at that moment, none of that mattered. The only thing she knew for certain was that she couldn't close her eyes to that kind of pain. The lamp burned slowly, casting shadows on the mud walls. The sound of the storm faded in the distance. But inside that small home, two lives were quietly stitching themselves together in a way even the village elders could never have predicted. Amina, a woman with no children. Nala, a child with no mother, one who stitched fabric to survive, and one who bore hidden wounds on her body and soul. That night, beneath the same roof, they threaded without words the first stitch of a bond no one could undo. When silence finally blanketed the night, Amina leaned her head against the wall, closed her eyes, and whispered a quiet prayer. May this child never cry alone again. And so, while the world slept, a family was born, not of blood, but of compassion and courage. Morns in the village of Canola were usually loud, the crowing of roosters mixed with the pounding of mortar, the laughter of children running through the yard, and the constant movement of women fetching water. But that morning, everything felt quieter to Amina. She had risen early, still tired from the night she had taken Nala in, and stepped into the yard to hang the girl's wet clothes. The fabric dripped slowly, each falling drop a reminder of the cold the child had endured in the rain, abandoned by her own uncle as she hung the last piece. Araspi's voice called from behind the bamboo fence. Amina, may I speak with you for a moment? It was old Zubaydah, one of the village's eldest residents. Her hair was entirely white, and her skin carried deep traces of time. She walked, leaning on a wooden cane, but her eyes still sharp. Elder wisdom many in the village respected. Amina rushed to open the small gate in the fence and helped her in. Zubaydah accepted a seat on a wooden bench beneath the shade of the cashew tree. After catching her breath, she looked at the seamstress with a serious expression. I know you've been taking care of the girl, and I also know Bakar doesn't like that one bit. Amina felt a knot tighten in her chest. Her heart sped up at the thought that her actions might have become an even bigger topic of gossip in the village. But before she could say a word, the old woman raised her hand, asking for silence. Listen carefully, daughter. What that man is doing to Nala isn't just a matter of temper. He has a plan. Amina's eyes widened. A plan? Zubaydah took a deep breath and continued. I heard it with my own ears. Just days ago, when he was arguing with a man from the neighboring village, Bakar wants to sell the girl. Yes, sell her. He plans to send her off to work as a servant in a faraway household. In exchange for a few coins and favors, Amina raised a hand to her mouth, her body going cold. The image of Nala, fragile and scared, being taken away with no one to protect her, tore at her soul. He didn't raise that child out of love, Suba went on, bitterness in her voice. He raised her for profit. Always said, a small mouth is trouble, but small hands can be profitable. The silence that followed was heavy. Amina could barely breathe. She had known Bakar was cruel. She had seen the bruises he left on his niece, but never had she imagined his cruelty could go that far. Are you sure, Zu? She asked, her voice trembling. I am, the old woman said firmly. This is non-neighbor's gossip. It's what I heard with these ears. Ears that have heard more than they ever wanted to. Amina closed her eyes, trying to compose herself. The wind rustled the cashew leaves, but it did nothing to calm the storm rising in her chest. She looked toward the house where Nala still slept, curled up beneath the colorful blanket. She watched the girl breathing peacefully, unaware of the danger that loomed over her dot. In that moment, Amina made an excellent but unshakable decision. She would not let Baka carry out that plan. She would not allow that child to be traded like a piece of property, as if her life had a price. Thank you for telling me, Mother Zubit, Amina said, holding the Ellers's wrinkled hand. May God repay you for your courage. The old woman only nodded like someone who had fulfilled the duty. Before leaving, she glanced once more at the house and murmured, Protect her, Amina, because if you don't, no one else will. And with slow steps, she left the yard. Amina remained seated on the bench for a while, feeling the weight of the revelation. She remembered her own mother who used to say, There are truths that once spoken become burdens that change the life of the one who hears them. Now she carried that burden. But with it came the certainty that this wasn't an ordinary choice. This was a battle for a child's dignity. That day, Amina did not return to the workshop. She stayed close to Nala, watching her play with colorful threads and small scraps of cloth. Each shy smile the girl gave was a silent promise that Amina would fight to the end. And so deep within Amina's heart, a vow was born. She would not let Nala's innocence be traded like merchandise. Even if she had to face Bakkers's fury alone, even if the entire village doubted her, she would fight until the very last thread of hope. The afternoon sun bathed the Mudises in gold as the drums echoed through the village, calling the people of Canola to council. Whenever serious disputes or accusations arose, the elders gathered in the central square beneath the great tree, that had for generations stood witness to the struggles of its people. It was there that decisions were made, where each word could weigh like stone or liberate like the wind. That day, Amina walked to the square with a fire burning in her chest. Beside her, Nala kept her head down, clinging to the seamstress's hand as if it were her last hope. On the other side, Bakar walked with confident strides and a proud expression. His face bore the conviction of a man who had always won by the weight of his voice and the fear he inspired. The whole village gathered. Men and women formed a circle around the tree. The elders, their walking sticks planted firmly in the earth, waited in silence. The eldest among them, Idris, lifted his deep voice. "We are here to hear both sides. Amina, daughter of Zyla, has brought an accusation against Baka, son of Kamal. Speak, woman, and let your words be true." Amina took a deep breath. Her eyes scanned the faces of the crowd, many skeptical, some curious, a few sympathetic. She lifted her chin and spoke with unwavering resolve. "This child," she gestured to Nala, who shrank beside her, "suffers at the hands of her own uncle. She bears marks on her body and her spirit, marks that many choose not to see. And now a secret has come to light. Bakar plans to sell her as a servant to a distant village. Not out of love, not out of care, but for profit." A murmur rippled through the circle. Women covered their mouths in shock, and a few men frowned. But before anyone could react further, Baka stepped forward. Furious. "Lies," he roared. "This seamstress is nothing but a witch trying to ruin my name. She defends an ungrateful girl just to draw attention to herself. Who will believe a woman alone over a man of blood?" The elders struck their staffs on the ground, calling for order. But Becker's voice still rang out bitter and sharp. "She wants to destroy me," he went on. "Ever since she started meddling in my affairs, I've been the target of gossip. Don't let this meddler bring shame to the council." Amina stood her ground. She didn't raise her voice to match his rage. Instead, she took Nala gently in her arms and lifted the girl's blouse, revealing the old scars on her back. A silence fell over the gathering, sharp and immediate. Nala's face flushed with shame, but her tear-filled eyes said more than words ever could. "Who doing is this?" Amina asked, her voice trembling but firm. "A loving uncles or adherents?" The elders exchanged glances. Idris stared hard at Baka, Heiss' expression grave, but the man did not retreat. On the contrary, he raised his fist and pointed at Amina. "She uses witchcraft to deceive. Those marks could have been made on purpose to accuse me. Can't you see? This woman is dangerous." The murmurs grew louder. Some still sided with Baka, clinging to the authority he held as a man and head of household. But others couldn't look away from Nayla's scars or the silent tears on her face. The girl said nothing, but her gaze met the elders. It was a look of plea, of long-carried pain, of truth that needs no words. And in that brief moment, even the most doubtful felt the weight of her innocence. Sensing the shift, Amina concluded, "I asked for no wealth, no favor. I ask only that this child be protected, because if we close our eyes today, tomorrow the forest will swallow her cries for good." A deep silence followed. Even the winds seemed to wait for the Ehlers' decision. They bowed their heads, murmuring among themselves, while the village held its breath. The battle was not yet over. The final word had not been spoken. But in that moment, Baka's voice no longer carried the weight it once had. The council dispersed with the promise of a new gathering. But everyone knew something had changed. For the first time, the cruel uncle had felt his authority tremble in the face of a woman's courage, and the truth written in a child's eyes. The day of the final judgment arrived with the weight of a storm about to break. From early morning, the village of Canola moved in tense silence, as if everyone sensed something important was about to unfold. The elders had summoned all to the central square. Beneath the great tree, where irreversible decisions were made, Amina rose early, dressed in her simplest clothes, and tied a blue scarf around her hair, the same shade as the scrap of fabric she had found caught on the thorn in the forest. For her, the gesture was symbolic, a reminder that everything had begun with the torn thread of Nala's skirt. By her side, the girl walked with her head down, but her steps were steadier than before. Fear still lived in her eyes, but now there was also a spark of courage. Baka was already in the square when they arrived. His face wore an arrogant confidence. He greeted the elder men, gave forced nods to the women, and even smiled at the children as if trying to appear the wronged uncle. Victim of a meddling woman and an ungrateful child, slung over his shoulder was a leather sadaci. Lot, the elders, began the session. Idris, the eldest among them, raised his voice with authority. "Today we will hear both sides one last time. Let the truth come forth before all." Bear was the first to speak. He puffed out his chest and launched words sharp as arrows. "I am being falsely accused. Amina makes up stories to stain my name. She hates me because I've always kept her in her place. As for the girl, she is rebellious, ungrateful, and a liar. Who here hasn't seen children make things up? Why should we believe her over her own blood? Some men nodded, others simply watched in silence. Emboldened, Barker continued. This seamstress speaks of love and care, but everyone knows she is alone. No husband, no children. What right does she have to speak about family? Amina's chest tightened, but she didn't respond. She only squeezed Nala's hand, trembling beside her. It was her turn to speak, but before she could open her mouth, the unexpected happened. As Baka turned to gesture dramatically toward the crowd, the satchel on his shoulder slipped open. A bundle of papers fell to the dirt in the center of the square. The wind caught a few and scattered them. A child ran to retrieve one but stopped, startled after reading the first few lines. "Elder Idris, look," the boy called, handing the page to the elder. The old man took the paper, adjusted his glasses, and his expression darkened. The other elders gathered around reading each page in turn. A wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd. Then Idris raised his voice. "These are letters of negotiation. It's written here. B was offering the girl as a servant to a man from the neighboring village in exchange for payment and favors." A chilling silence fell over the square. Time seemed to stop. Baka Pale tried to explain, No, that's not what it is. These letters mean nothing. They're drafts, just scribbles." But the crowd no longer heard him the same way. The women murmured in anger, some with tears in their eyes, at the thought of Nala being sold like property. The men averted their gaze, ashamed for having believed him for so long. Amina, standing tall, didn't need to say a word. She simply placed her hand on Nala's shoulder and drew her close. The girl's eyes, once clouded with fear, now met the eyes of the villagers, and in their gaze, for the first time she saw compassion and remorse. One of the elders, Cadilla, stood with resolve. "Bakar, your own hand condemns you. There is no witchcraft here. No fabrication. Here lies the proof of your disgrace." Baka lunged forward, trying to snatch the papers from the elder's hands, but the village men held him back. His physical strength no longer had power over the truth laid bare. The crowd stirred and a voice rang out. "Expel him. Whoever tries to sell a child has no place among us." Cries of agreement rose and the elders struck their staffs on the ground, confirming the verdict. Barker would be expelled from the village, banished with the mark of disgrace. As he was dragged away, shouting and struggling, Nala watched in silence. There was no joy in her eyes, but a deep relief, like someone waking from a long nightmare. Amin embraced her, and together they stood tall before the crowd. That day, the entire village witnessed the downfall of a man who had hidden behind the word. Honor, the truth, long silenced, was revealed not by force or grand speeches, but by the simple fall of a leather satchel that spilled the darkest of secrets. And so Bakar left Canola, carrying the weight of his own shame. His name would never again be spoken with respect. Bak's banishment struck Canola like a thunderclap, shaking the very roots of the village. In the first days after his expulsion, silence dominated the gatherings. People lowered their eyes whenever his name was mentioned. Slowly, however, that collective shame melted into quiet acceptance. One by one, they began to see what they had long refused to acknowledge. The cruelty of that man had always been there. It was courage that had been missing. For not her uncle's downfall brought not only relief, but a strange emptiness. For the first time, she no longer had to fear Bak as shadow around every corner. But she also found herself facing a quiet question. Who was she now? With no mother, no father, and no blood tie, however cruel, connecting her to a home. The answer came not through grand gestures, but in the quiet rhythm of daily life. Amina, the seamstress, opened her door to the girl and never closed it again. Nala began waking each morning to the sound of the loom and the rhythmic tapping of Amina's needle, cutting through the silence like the steady beat of a heart that refuses to give up. Little by little, Nala began to help, first sweeping the workshop floor, then organizing fabrics until one day Amina handed her a needle. "Try a stitch here, girl," she said, pointing to a worn-out cloth. Nala's hands trembled. They were used to carrying heavy buckets of water, hauling firewood, shielding herself from blows, not holding something so delicate. The needle felt foreign in her fingers. Still, she tried. The first stitch came out crooked, the second even more so. But Amina didn't correct her harshly. She gave a soft smile and said, "It doesn't matter how it begins. What matters is having the courage to take the first stitch." And so day after day, Nala learned each stitch she made was like a small mending of her own soul. It was as if by joining the pieces of fabric, she was also piecing together the torn parts of her life. The mistakes grew fewer, her hand more steady, until soon her fingers found a rhythm of their own, as if they had always been meant for this. The neighbors, who once looked at her with suspicion, began to notice the change. "That girl has hands that stitch the future," they whispered. Some even began to request small jobs, And Nala, proud, would hand over pieces soon with care. Her once hesitant smile now glowed with quiet confidence. Amina watched everything in silence. She didn't need words to understand what was happening. She saw in Nala the semestrength that once saved her own mother, and felt that her mission was being fulfilled. Not just to shelter, but to teach how to turn pain into dignity. Their afternoons became moments of learning and sharing. As the sun dipped and the sound of cicadas filled the air, Amina and Nala stitched side by side. Between threads, the girl asked questions about the villagers' stories, old proverbs, and Amina's life. And the Seamstress, patient, answered, passing on not just her craft, but the quiet wisdom stored in her heart. Always remember this, Nala, she once said during one of those quiet conversations. The finest fabric can tear, but hands that know how to stitch are never lost. With every word, Nala learned that her life didn't have to be defined by theskars on her body. There was a new path woven with courage, faith, and hope. Time passed, and the bond between them grew so strong that there was no longer a difference between mother and daughter. They needed no paper, no blood tie to justify it. The quiet love between them spoke for itself. When Nala completed a piece on her own, Amina would look at her with quiet pride as if to say, now you can stitch your own destiny. And so, in the same village that once looked at her with disdain, Nala earned respect not by being the daughter of someone important, but by showing that hope can be learned, stitched slowly, stitch by stitch, until it becomes a new future. The cruel uncle no longer existed in her life. His name had become a mark of disgrace, erased from the memory of the community. What remained was the story of a girl who once wept in the forest and who, guided by the courage of a seamstress, found the strength to stitch her own hope. In that simple home made of clay and thread, the girl didn't just survive. She was reborn. Time passed, and the village of Canola was never the same after Baka's judgment. His name became synonymous with disgrace, often repeated as a cautionary tale of everything a man should never be. When the elders offered advice to the young, they'd say, don't be like, who lost everything because he failed to honor even his own. His memory was no longer one of strength or authority, but of shame, of downfall, and betrayal of his own blood. Meanwhile, Nala's life blossomed within Amina's clay-walled home. The girl who once carried only the weight of abandonment in her eyes now walked with firmer steps. Fear didn't vanish overnight. There were still nights when she awoke in a panic, haunted by the sound of the whip slicing the air or the feel of cold rain on her skin. But in those moments when she opened her eyes, she always found the calm presence of the seamstress lighting the lamp, holding her hand and whispering a prayer. And so little by little, the terror of the past gave way to something new. Safety. Amina, for her part, never sought praise. She continued her humble life, sewing dresses, altering pants, embroidering cloths for the women of the village. But everyone knew her home was no longer just a place of craft. It had become a refuge, a symbol of dignity. The women who once eyed her with suspicion began to see her differently. Many started confiding in her stories, long buried, memories of pain hidden for years. It was as if her courage had carved a path, making room for others to find strength to dot. The bond between Amina and Nala took root like an ancient tree. There was no need for papers, no need for titles or written names. The whole village came to understand. Mother and daughter don't always share the same blood. Sometimes they shared the same heart. One day, during a harvest celebration, Nala presented the women with a cloth embroidered entirely by her own hands. It was simple, but every stitch was steady. Every thread told a story. When she placed it in the hands of Elder Idris to be set on the celebration altar, a voice rose from the crowd. That girl, she's no longer the orphan of shame. She's the daughter of the seamstress. The phrase spread, and Nala lowered her eyes, shy, but the smile blooming on her lips could not be hidden. Beside her, Amina felt her chest fill with warmth. She didn't need applause. That moment of recognition was enough. Time with its patient fingers stitched the open wounds shut. What was once pain became testimony. The girl who once wept in the forest found her voice in the warmth of a home. And the woman who once followed scraps and threads through the trees ended up weaving something far greater. A new life made of dignity, courage, and quiet love. Some still asked, and what if her father returns one day? Amina would simply reply, if he does, he'll find a daughter already standing, ready to choose her own path. And so the story of Nala and Amina stopped being just a memory in the village. It became a lesson passed down in evening gatherings, remembered by mothers speaking of courage, shared by grandmothers teaching about justice. Because in the end, it wasn't just the girl who was saved from cruelty. It was the entire community that learned through their example that true strength isn't born of violence, but of compassion. On the last night before the rainy season, Nala sat beside Amina stitching a new piece of cloth. The sound of the needle piercing in and out of the fabric filled the silence with a rhythm almost sacred. Then the girl looked up and said, her voice steady as if she had finally understood her own story. "Mama, it wasn't my uncle who defined me. It was you." Amina held back tears and answered with a single gesture, gently running her hand through her daughter's hair. No more words were needed. Life had already written the final line. And so, between threads and scraps, the whole village bore witness that justice may delay, but it never fails when it finds hearts willing to resist. The cruel uncle vanished into the dust of forgotten memory, and the girl who once wept in the forest now stitched hope for herself and for all who looked upon her. If this story touched your heart, let us know where you're watching from. Leave a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. Don't forget to like the video, share it with your friends and family, and subscribe to the channel. That really helps us keep bringing you real and emotional stories like this one. Thank you for being part of our